So happy to have you on the show. As we were just talking about, the time differences can get tricky. You're showing up with different energy. You mentioned that you, when you're working in South Africa, are typically working from 4 p.m. to midnight. What is that like, and what has that allowed you to do before your work starts?
Yeah. No, I'm really happy to be here, guys. And I've listened to your podcast and we've connected on LinkedIn and I have a ton of overlap and synergies of just mindset and also travel. And yeah, to your point about travel, I think that's one of my favorite parts of remote work is the ability to like play around with different time zones and schedules. And for me, I've worked I worked in Hawaii. That was my first destination I went to. So that was opposite. So I was getting up at like 3 a.m., working till like 11 a.m. in the morning, and then I was done. Um, and then you can play around. So when I was in South Africa and when I was in Europe, I worked like 3 p.m. To like 11, 4 p.m. to midnight, which got hard after a while. But in the mornings, you have your full day, so it's really refreshing to like be able to hike in the morning, do your whole routine, wake up with no alarm, which I feel like a lot of us in the U.S. like aren't used to. Like we're always used to setting an alarm at like 6 a.m., having your morning routine, and it's refreshing to kind of let your body wake up like when it naturally does, and then have your activities if you do a lot of stuff during the day. Like I had basically a full day, so it made like the work life balance a lot better because I felt like I had time to like live my life how I wanted to. And especially in South Africa, I wasn't doing much at night anyway. So it was nice to like work at night. And I found like my creativity and focus was better later in the afternoon anyway. So, yeah, that was kind of my schedule there. And like the ability to have flexible work and remote work, I think is like what allowed me to kind of find out more about my schedule that works better for me.
Yeah, I love that. I love having the flexibility to ease into your day instead of getting yanked out of bed by an alarm clock going off.
Yes, exactly.
And anytime we have flexibility to design how we want our day to look, having that long morning, starting work later in the day, obviously the time zone comes into play there, but having some flexibility around when you start work and when you end is super nice. And
Yes.
I know we dove straight in with a specific question, but you've been traveling the world for 3 years. What is that like?
Yeah. It's been amazing. When I started traveling, it was always my dream to like be a digital nomad. And I didn't know if it was possible to work and travel. So I studied for 4 years, got my undergrad degree. And one of the years I studied abroad in Australia. And I just fell in love with travel and just experiencing other cultures. Like I was super nervous to leave. That's always a question people have is like, were you just not scared? It's like you're always going to be nervous to go. It's like people who choose to go, it's not because it's easy. It's just because it's something that like they're called to. So when I first went to Australia, it was amazing. And like right when I left, I mean, there's always like highs and lows in travel, but like the minute you actually like go and do it, it's like way less scary than the thought of actually doing it is like the first thing I learned. And then from Australia, after studying abroad, I was like, man, I need to keep this lifestyle up. So I was looking at different ways to do like remote work and traveling or just traveling after college for a few years. Um, and then yeah, was super passionate about like the tech space and remote work. And I had worked remotely all through college. So I already knew kind of the setup worked for me, working remotely worked for me. So I only applied to remote companies after graduating and then had a job lined up and was like fully remote. And I was like, I can work remotely from like my hometown or like book a one-way ticket and just like see what happens. So that was when I booked a one-way to Hawaii because COVID was still kind of happening. So I wanted to like still be in the US, but experience something different. So I went to Oahu and then extended and then met a group of friends there that I kept traveling with. And Shan is her name, and she's who I have the podcast with now today. So we also have a podcast, and we started it to kind of capture our travel journey and like have guests on of people we've met traveling, and then also be a resource to other people who want to start traveling, want to work remotely, want to find remote work, and just like all the highs and lows that come with being a nomad. It's like super glamorized online, but there's also a lot of highs and lows too. So it's been a great journey. And I'm super grateful for remote work that's like allowed me to be able to also travel and meet people, like lifelong connections from all over the world.
So cool. Yeah, definitely relate to what you're saying about like it's not you're not going because it's easy. You're going
Yeah.
because you were called to do it. And it almost gets to a point where it's like I can't not do this. This is something
Mm-hmm.
that is really like I don't want to miss this opportunity. Was that something that in your life you like loved traveling before, or was that something you discovered like, wow, this is actually something that I could do with my life and create a lifestyle around traveling and just working from the road?
Yeah. I you know, I hadn't traveled much growing up, and I think that was what really inspired me to want to, because I grew up like we would do a lot of fun activities in the area, but I was just like, I have so much, I don't know what else is out there, and I'm so young, and I hadn't done a lot of international travel, that I think that's why it interested me so much.
Hmm.
um so it was quite the opposite. There's a lot of people I've met traveling who was like, yeah, like I did all these trips, I studied abroad here, and like I went to this Europe family vacation, and like I didn't have that experience. So for me, it was more of like the unknowns that excited me, and I was like, I just want to see as much as I can, and seize like a moment in time of like, you have this calling and you have the opportunity to do so through remote work or opportunities that I was like, I want to like make the most out of what this could be. And always like allowing yourself the space to return home if it doesn't work well. Like that was always like, if I feel burnt out, if this doesn't work, if I'm not performing well at work, like you can always go back to what you know, but like you'll always be wondering what could have been if you don't go.
Hmm. Where are you from?
So I'm from Massachusetts, like right outside of Boston.
Hmm. Nice. Where are you now?
I'm actually in Maine, so just the state next to it. But I plan to be home like in the Massachusetts area for the next few months.
Mhm.
Yeah, I came back in June, and then yeah, the traveling's been great, but I've been feeling like very called home and to be around family. And my sister's getting married next year, so I feel like for me, the values and priorities, I always say like you have a set of values, but in terms of like the order in which they all kind of shuffle around. So from there, travel is like still a big priority of mine, but then like other things kind of get shifted up, like family and being around for certain milestones and stuff like that.
Mhm.
um so planning to be like in the Massachusetts area, have a base, and then travel from there moving forward for just at least a couple months or so, and then go from there. I don't know how long I'll be able to last too, not traveling.
Right. So
Yeah.
interesting. Like with this travel lifestyle, I mean, we definitely connect on this. I'm in
Yeah.
Tokyo now, and I mean, I'm coming home like this week for a little trip. And just how have you found like, because it's something when you say like, I want to be just a nomad, I want to create a life where I'm traveling and working from wherever in the world. It's, I mean, I guess we never know what's going to happen that far in the well in the future at all,
Mhm.
but we could make hypotheses
Mhm.
hypotheses. So like, how do you find that? Do you feel like sometimes it's hard because it's like, oh, I've created this identity. Like for me, it's like I see myself as like this. I have to live almost like in foreign countries now, and part of me is like, well, I don't really want to be in America, not because I don't like it or anything, but like there's just so much out there that I want to
Mhm.
experience. But then it's also really hard too. Like I've been in Japan for 2 years, and yeah, like I need to come home for a little bit right now, just kind of at my
Mhm.
wits end.
Yes.
Um, so how do you like manage kind of feeling like, oh, I have to do this because it's this thing I've created and I'm like the traveler now, versus like, no, it's fine to go home when you want, and like I could even stay home if like I just want to. Um,
Yes.
how have you managed that
Yeah.
identity and
I
that sort
feel
of thing?
like we're in very similar phases, because I felt the same way after
Mhm.
like 3 years of travel. And it gets hard too, because you're in like a beautiful place and you're like, on paper, this is amazing. And like my photos are amazing, all of this, but then you don't feel as grateful. And for me, that was kind of just like a red flag of like, I don't have to travel just to travel, but I want to travel and like fully be appreciative of the experiences. And like for me, if you're craving home and you're feeling burnt out and like you're called home, I think it's a sign too. And through traveling and travelers, I think you get really in tune with your intuition. And I think that's also something that I've just learned to trust. It's like, yeah, traveling's fun and it's like, it feels natural now to be like this traveler and you have this persona. But I think I had to do a lot of like letting go of what that looked like and like trusting your intuition of like maybe you aren't supposed to be there right now, or like you got everything out of that experience and you can always go back to. So it's all things I'm learning, especially when like your identity feels very wrapped into like travel or digital nomad. But I think too, like a digital nomad is something like it's working remotely from a different place too. So it's for me, it's like you don't have to necessarily be in Tokyo to be this traveler persona. Like you can go back to LA and go travel around California and still be a traveler. And you can go back to LA and be a digital nomad working remotely from a coffee shop in LA. So I think it's just like taking those pressures off of yourself, and allowing yourself to kind of shift in terms of who you are and what that looks like for this chapter. And like you can always go back to Tokyo too, you know? So it's a learning, and I think it's something all digital nomads struggle with. Like I have friends who have done this too, and they're like, well, I love traveling, so to go home almost feels like it's less exciting, like you're giving up, like you're burnt out. But it's also like there's so much good that can come too from returning back home, and even sharing like your learnings with people back in LA that you haven't seen in 2 years too. So yeah,
For sure. Yeah, it's I think just getting more comfortable like with the give and take, and like you're saying, trusting your intuition. And that's something you get better attuned with when you're having new experiences and like just being more on your own and like self-reliant and figuring things out. So yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah.
I feel fortunate because I get to sit down with both of you who are traveling out there in the world. And Paige, I know you're home right now, but you've been in many
yeah,
foreign countries. And we're going to talk about the fun, the exciting, the most memorable moments. But while we're kind of on this topic of the challenges, what are, and Vinny, I'll ask you as well after, what are some of the unique challenges that only come from being in another country?
yeah, it's a good question. Something I've also tried to share more on LinkedIn and on Instagram and TikTok. Like I think I'm guilty of it too, like creating this highlight reel. It's like the laptop with the beach view, exists, but I think also there's so many challenges that come. And it's the ones people think of at first. It's like Wi-Fi issues, but it's very stressful because if you have Wi-Fi issues and you're an employee and you're like in New York or you're in Boston or you're in LA, you're like, oh, my Wi-Fi is out today. But like you have this like comfort of, you know, being in the US. But if you're in like Panama or you're in somewhere else, you have this pressure depending on the company you're working for. That's like, you feel a little bit more guilty because you're like, would this happen if I was somewhere else? So there's just like that added pressure. I also think nomads tend to like overwork. So for a lot of us, it's like you're working overtime to kind of like overcompensate, improve yourself. So that's something I talk to a lot of people about who are first starting nomading is like have a set schedule and don't necessarily feel like you have to like overperform just because you're somewhere else. Like if your company's fully remote, it doesn't matter where you are, because that can lead to burnout really quick. Same with just your hours. Like I talked about the 4 to midnight and it was amazing, but like reflecting back, I'm like, oh, that could have also sped up like travel burnout because, you know, you work till midnight, you have a day that's a bit longer, you work till like 2 a.m., just like 7 p.m. normally, but it's 2 a.m. So that like impacts your sleep schedule. So like the flexibility and the way that you work at night. Also, like the next day, I was really bad at being like, oh, today's a chill day. Like, I don't know if you experienced this, Vinny, but like in a new country, it's exciting. So you want to travel. Like, you don't want a day to be like a day you lay on the couch and watch TV. Like, that's sometimes like a lazy Sunday at home, but you're like, I'm in a new country. So you don't give yourself these like typical rest days, which is something that I also try to like warn nomads. Is like, we weave those in because otherwise it will lead to burnout too if you're just constantly on, especially if you're working and traveling. And then, yeah, the other parts, I would say just like homesick. Like a lot of nomads, I think some people are like, oh, people escape because they don't have like a good family life or like connections at home. And it's the case for some people, and they find an escape and they can kind of recreate themselves and find community other places. But for myself and a lot of my close friends, it's like we had that at home. Like we have close friends at home, we have close connections with our family, and it's hard to leave that. And hard to miss milestones. So it's a sacrifice too. So there's always something you're going to sacrifice with this lifestyle. And it's just how you try to stay connected with family when you're gone. And whether that's FaceTime or just more quality time when you are back home. But like I said, like I think also allowing yourself to shift in time. Like for 3 years I traveled, and now I'm like, okay, if I take 1 year like present with family at home, like I think in the grand scheme of my life that will feel more balanced, because it's like a value that's kind of more important to me in this moment in time, after traveling full time for 3 years too. So I would say those are the first ones that come to mind of like hard parts of nomading, but there's a ton too that come up, and exhaustion or things go wrong. You really have to just trust the process and kind of surrender to anything that could happen. You can miss your flight, your bags can get lost. You could, miss a work shift because, you know, we were supposed to land by the time you were supposed to start work, but instead you don't. And like, how do you navigate that conversation or deadlines? So a ton of different
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm taking
A lot
from
of
all of that is
hoops.
that Vinny doesn't experience any of that because he had no friends at home,
No, I wasn't
family,
leaving
no
anything.
family.
Yeah.
I just had my bandana over the shoulder and I hit the high road. Yep. On that question, or that topic,
Mm,
like, so there's clearly all these, I want to call them surface level, but like just these trivialities and difficulties and things that you see on the surface that can suck. Like, why do it? Why are you really doing it? I don't know if that's an existential question or like what's at the heart of your reason for
yeah.
embarking on this and like taking up this lifestyle.
Yeah. I think there's way, like I said, all those negatives, but I think there's like by far way more positives that outweigh the negatives. I think for me, the original reason of going was just one, to test myself, like to go outside of my comfort zone. Like I was so scared, I remember, of like flying and travel and just being in a new country and everything that feels so normal and you just know how to do in the US. You're like, I don't know what to do here. Like, how do I pay for this? What currency is this? Like anything that feels like you have the answer to, it's all new in a new country. So I was just excited by that, to learn and to grow, and then also to see other spots where you feel like you belong in terms of living. And then what grew to be like the number one reason that like kept me traveling and like makes me still want to travel and think about now ways to kind of integrate this into life back in the US is like connection, and connection with people all around the world. And the amount of people I've met, whether like around my age or I have so many friends that are like 60, 70, 80 years old that are just like connecting with people that you feel maybe you don't speak the same language, maybe it's like different cultural experiences, but there's like something that unites everyone, and it's like a really beautiful experience to be able to connect with someone across the world, who you would have never met unless you like did that step to book that flight and meet them.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact that you can have, especially with our privilege of like being from the US, and you can go to some other countries that, like I spent time in South Africa, and a lot of times you are like hope for a lot of people who are in like poverty or in different situations. So to have these conversations and to be able to give back or volunteer or just like hold space for people, it's super refreshing to me, and also just like the connections and friendships that I have,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes the world feel so much smaller. And it's exciting too to be like just by yourself in another country. It's scary, but at the same time it's like you really feel like you're living when you're doing those things that you were scared of, and then you meet people and you're involved in a community like all the way across the world. So I think, yeah, it's just like the most exhilarating way to live life. And yeah, it could be addicting though.
Would you say it sets your soul on fire?
I would say
Put in those
this.
words. Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like it day to day. I think our experiences too might be just a little bit different since I'm kind of in
Yeah.
one place for a long time, got like an apartment and stuff. So it's like I'm not really a digital nomad. It's like I'm just kind of living here. I don't know how long it's going to be, probably for one more year in Japan, but
Hmm.
definitely many of the same difficulties and joys, and but some different ones. But I think what it boils down to is like when I ask that question, it's kind of asking myself too, like, why do it? Why do it? It's difficult. It takes like courage, and it's like I don't have to do this, but you have those moments in a foreign place that are just like I can't believe this is
Hmm.
life. Like I can't
Hmm.
believe this is my life. I can't believe this is just like happening out in the world and I get to experience it, and it feels like a connection with the past and like ancient history,
Hmm.
and those are the moments I'm like none of this stuff matters that like we're so worried about, and you just see how people live around
Yep.
the world that are so different from you, and you're like it America seems like everything until I realize it's not. I'm like, people just live in Japan their whole lives, never leaving, never even like thinking about America. And it's like our perspective just shifts so much.
Yeah.
And have you had any of those moments recently? And if you'd like to share, just when,
100%.
yeah, sure.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting too, and I think it gets so much harder the more you see. Like it's a privilege to be able to see the world and to have this freedom, but sometimes it's so overwhelming to be like you pick up on how people live in Italy and how people live in South Africa and how people live in Japan, and then you also miss parts of the US. So a lot of you, or for me, I like crave home sometimes and that feeling of home, but then I get back home and I'm like I also miss every other place I've been plus all the people. So sometimes I think it's like you can feel homesick for so many places, and even for me now I'm like the more you see the more like you also miss, which is a beautiful thing. But now I'm like I feel like I have a home in a lot of spots. I've stayed longer, and probably even more for you because you spend 2 years at a time, maybe longer, so you actually are fully living there. And I find it funny too because people have different reactions, but sometimes I feel like so much doesn't change for some people from when I leave and come back that like they don't realize how long you've actually been living in another country. That it's not like they like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like I also traveled somewhere for 1 week, but like you lived in Tokyo for 2 years, so your experience and how you're going to adjust back and the time it's going to take you to adjust back to the US will be a lot different than
Mm-hmm.
other people too. So I think we just have more to think about the more we see, and it helps you realize parts. Like I missed so many pieces of the US, but then it's also like staying true to who you are and who you've become in every single place, and like keeping that wherever you are. And that's like the phase that I'm in, is like how can I go back to like my hometown and still feel the interest to want to like connect with people and talk to people and keep all of these things that are like super exciting as a traveler, like in everyday life, and also like inspire other people to do the same. Because I was like, the one thing I don't want to happen is, when people study abroad and then they're like always remembering that moment. They're like, remember when I studied abroad? I'm like, I don't want my like nomad experience to be that. I want to like integrate it into life and like bring what I've learned and have that impact people like on a smaller scale too. Because it is possible. You don't need to fly across the world to have these. And I think what you guys are doing with this podcast too, like shows that. And your posts on LinkedIn, Gregory, like all of that too. Like I think there's so many ways to inspire people beyond just travel.
There's
For
so
sure.
many ways to inspire people. And speaking of inspiration, I loved your content page from the first moment I saw it because it really is about that human connection and that feeling. The feeling I get when I look at it is that we're all the same and we can connect regardless of language barriers, geographical barriers, all the things. I would love to hear the story of your South African security guard and what you did for him.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a lease in Cape Town. So I was there for 7 months. Last time I went to Cape Town, we did Airbnb. This time we were like, oh, let's get a place. We'll be there for a little bit longer. So we moved into an apartment building, and yeah, we called him security guard, which like once it went viral on TikTok, everyone was like, you guys have personal security? We're like, no, we just meant like the front desk person. So I was just like the front desk worker at this apartment.
Got it.
But security, he liked to go by that. So anyways, we like formed a really great connection with him. He was basically worked like every day. So anytime we came in and out of our building, he was there. We would chat with him. We got to know like his kids' names, his wife's name, like would bring him his favorite snacks, whatever he likes. Like we were like friendly with him. If I had FaceTime my grandma, he would like meet my like know about like family stuff. It was really great,
Coming
like a
home for
friend.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And then he shared too, like, so Shan, who I was living with, she is from Canada, and she was like, I am going back home. And he was like, my dream is to go to Canada. He had this like really big fixation on Canada. And he had also never flown before. So he was telling us like it would be my dream to go on a plane, fly to Canada. And we were like, one day, like, that would be awesome. And when Shan went back to Canada, she brought back like a bunch of stuff and like surprised him with it. So that was like a really great like feel good moment. And from there he was like, yes, I would love to fly there. And we were like, okay, that's a little different.
These treats are great, but I still want to go to Canada.
I was like, I don't know. And then from there though, we're like, okay, we'll keep it like top of mind. And the year before on my birthday, we did a helicopter tour. It was like my dream to go on a helicopter ride. So we did it over Cape Town. And we did it with like NAC helicopters and kept in contact with like their marketing person at the company, and we're really good friends. So he was like, we would love to like do a collab and take you girls up and like post on TikTok, share it with our audience and stuff. And Shannon and I were like, that would be amazing, but we've already done it. So then we were like, what if we bring him? Like, he's wanted to fly. And we asked our friend like who ran the marketing, and he was like, yeah, whatever you girls want to do, like up to you. You can bring whoever you want. We're like, we're gonna bring him, but we're gonna surprise him. So we like planned it on his day off and met him at our building, and we like took an Uber from our place to the spot where we took the helicopter off of. And he had like never been in an Uber before. He had like no idea where we were going, and he was like super proud in the Uber, like explaining his job, like, I'm their security for the building, like we're going on an adventure. Like it was really cool to see. And just also eye-opening that like he was working in a beautiful spot in Cape Town, but he never got to see it because he was always working. And also like he took public transportation. So for him just to come to work, it takes like hours, where he just doesn't have a car or can't afford Ubering and stuff. So it was just an eye-opening experience to be like, wow, you live where we like are living from across the world, but have never gone in an Uber. So, and to us, it's just second nature. Like, oh, of course, like I've been in an Uber, but it was a brand new experience for him. And we got there, and yeah, it was a total surprise. He was in shock and saw it coming down. In hindsight, we blindfolded him too, but we found out that was probably very scary because of the sound of the helicopter.
It's a full kidnapping.
PTSD.
The poor man's like, what is this noise with these girls that like, I don't know what's happening. But it was awesome. He walked into it, and like we have content from the whole thing of just like his reaction, and he was a little scared of heights, I think, but it was cool to see him like pointing out like, oh, here's Robin Island, like that's our building that I work in. Like it was really cool. And then when we landed, he was like, this is my legacy, like I'm gonna tell my grandkids about this, and like I'll remember this forever. So just that moment of like, even like with influencers or with content creators, of like you get so many experiences that like for us it would be amazing, but for him it like really meant the whole world. It's something he'll remember forever, and even enhance the experience for us too. So it made it a win-win all around. And even for the company, like that was their best performing like influencer collab ever. And I'm like, that just proves that like on our end, on his end, on like the world's end in terms of audience, it's like the world wants more content like that, and more just connection and collaboration. And it really took nothing else other than thinking like a little bit more about like how could this benefit somebody else. So yeah, and we still keep in touch with him. It's funny, like my WhatsApp, I always say, is a funny place because I just have like the most special but random connections from like everywhere I've traveled. So he'll send me like an audio note on WhatsApp like once a week, like, when are you girls coming back? So we're still friends. Yeah.
That's so cool. I feel like the world needs more of that authentic human connection content. And it makes me
Yes.
think of my friend Brad. He has a YouTube channel called Discover Connection that's
Cool.
all about doing stuff with strangers and just forming that connection because, like I said earlier, we're all human. We can all connect regardless of where we live, what we look like, what we do for a living. And it's so good. I was going to make a joke
Yes.
about the next collab should be therapy so he can work through that traumatic experience, but sounds like such a special
This collab.
one that he'll remember for the rest of his life.
Yes. No, that would be a good collab. I think there's a ton of options out there.
Those options. What made you want to go to Cape Town? Because I'm quite
Yeah.
interested as well.
Cape Town, it's amazing. Like, it's a place I'll always keep going back to. Probably the most, I mean, I spent the most amount of time there. I didn't have Cape Town or South Africa, anywhere in Africa on my radar at all. And I was in the Canary Islands, and I remember meeting 3 people like at a co-working spot who had just come from Cape Town, and they were like, you would love it. Like, it's a great spot for nomads. There's a ton of hiking and beaches and nightlife and cafes and a ton of young people and creatives. And I was like, like, I never had it on my radar.
Pretty good.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't know. I've never thought about it. And they said something, and then we met somebody else when we were in Portugal, and they were like, have you guys ever thought of Cape Town? I was like, well, kind of now. And then they gave us a contact of, he's like, well, my friend's like a tour guide there. Like, he's the go-to person if you guys ever go. So we took down his information. And then like a month later, a group of us like booked a place for like January in Cape Town. And it's opposite seasons as the US. So right now it's their winter. It will be their summer when it's our winter. So it's also just great in terms of like being from the East Coast and having like dark, cold, snowy winters. A lot of people will go from New York or other parts, even in Europe, to Cape Town then. So weather-wise, it's amazing. Like, if you want to do, 6 months or something. And just the people, like, once I went once, it was a really special place because in Europe or other places I've traveled, you meet people and then you overlap for like 2-3 days, but then they like go to the next hostel or the next country because you can travel around Europe quite fast. Whereas South Africa, it's a long flight. So once you're there, you're like kind of committed for like at the very, very least, like a week and a half, 2 weeks, because you want to make it worth it. So I think that's why it's easier to meet people. And it's the first place I've been to where like we left it and everyone's like, we'll see you next summer, like next Cape Town summer. So it's very much a place that people come back to. And like, I feel like I built a whole community and like group there. So I feel like that will always be there when I go back again. It feels more of like a place to live than just like a place to check off and go once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the topic of just like community and meeting people, how have you done it? Like, what has been, because I'm sure a lot of people are like so scared because I can't leave my friends from home, can't leave my family. Like, I'm not going to meet anyone out there. I'm not going to make any friends, maybe alone. How did you get over that if you did have those thoughts? And then how have you met people
Yes.
and created communities?
Yeah, I did have those thoughts. I think the first thing is just shifting your mindset, especially as a traveler. I always say I find it harder to make friends being like going out in Boston than it is like traveling by myself across the world. If you're putting yourself in spots where like other travelers are, because I always say, like, if you're interested in meeting someone, chances are they probably are interested in meeting you as well, especially if they're traveling. Like, very few people go to travel and are like, I'm not interested in meeting anyone. Like, I want to be solo. It's like maybe in moments, yes, but overall, like, people are open to that, which is why I think, like, it's so easy to be scared of it when you're at home. Like, all these fears of like, well, right now I'm scared of traveling and not being able to meet someone there. But then once you're there, you're meeting other people who are thinking pretty similar to you. So I think that thought process really helped me. Like when I first landed in Australia, like I was like, okay, everyone also just landed who is not from here, or they are from here but are expecting people. So like that mindset I think really helped me, just being like talking to people you're actually interested in and like sparking that conversation. And for me moving forward, it was all just like following what really interested me and getting involved like pretty soon on landing in any new place. So like I would always join a yoga studio or do a hike or go to a cafe that I like to work from, and not like isolating yourself. So going to places where you naturally would meet people, um, through activities that you really like. So you're more likely to meet like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
Joining Facebook groups has helped too. And especially in Cape Town, there was a ton of community events. Like there was a volleyball, yoga, running club. So trying to just join as many clubs as you can. And then I like meeting locals and stuff. So just trying to find more of the local spots, and then hanging out with one person who's from there can kind of spiral into meeting their friends and other connections. And doing so kind of early on in the beginning, I think always helps me to then learn more about other spots and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then too, like apps, like I used Bumble BFF. It's funny, me and Shan in Hawaii were both like, we both technically, we met separately, but we matched on like Bumble BFF. So that's also a really underrated platform that people even use in the US, jumping from different cities and stuff too. So the dating
I've
apps
heard
are also a
success
great
stories on
way.
there.
Yeah.
And that's like Bumble, like the dating app, but it's for friends.
Yeah. So there's Bumble Dating, then there's Bumble Biz, and then there's Bumble BFF. So there's 3
Interesting.
modes. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. My mind is blown. Vinny, you
Yeah,
going to me?
it seems like you got you're better at the groups and stuff than I would be. I can't seem to make it work.
Really? What
Yeah,
has
I'm
your
not great at that kind
experience
of
been
stuff.
like?
It's been so actually in Osaka, it was great. I had like, cause I came at a very unique time. It was the end, like pretty much the world was open from COVID, but Japan was like the last democratic nation to have its borders closed.
Mm-hmm.
But got a job teaching English, and
Cool.
so was brought over here, was shipped over, and um, they were still closed though to tourists. So I was like, it was very surreal just being in Japan with no tourists, and like, oh my god. And I met in my training group like just this core group of friends who, it was just hilarious.
A motley crew.
Like it was quite the motley crew, and we like, partially because we were in such a unique like situation together, just in Japan, first time working, starting this job, no tourists, and we're just minds blown. Um, we hit it off, and that like kind of spiraled, just meeting people from work and um, friends with some locals too and stuff. But then, yeah, that was crazy. And then Tokyo has been quite different. It's
Hmm.
been just a very unique chapter for me where I'm very much figuring things out, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
transition period, but
Mm-hmm.
also just a transformative time in my life of it just feels like this grand chapter is turning.
Mm.
But it's been much more me just on my own, kind of lone wolf in it a little bit, just kind of
Mm-hmm.
figuring things out, and call it kind of like a monk mode where I'm
Yeah.
just kind of focused on doing these things and kind of just trying to just kind of be a little bit
Mm.
more instead of like attacking
Mm-hmm.
life so much. I felt like I was doing just like pushing on ahead a lot. Um, but it does feel like I'm coming out of that, and that's like, I think I need to just go home and see family, see friends, not this guy with the mustache. Besides him, and yeah, it's very exciting. But yeah, it's been in Tokyo. I feel like, I don't know. For most places that you've been to, have they spoken English? It
Mm.
is like, just to encourage people. It is like if you're staying at hostels, like and sounds like you nailed it with like Facebook groups and going to places where like-minded people will congregate. They have most of these places like have they spoken English, and there's other travelers, but
Hmm.
that's a question.
I think it makes it a lot more difficult when they don't speak English, especially like
Yeah.
that's a really great point. So I think that's a huge thing of why I also really loved Cape Town, because there's diversity, but most people speak English. So I actually found that because after spending 7 months in Cape Town, I went to Tenerife in the Canary Islands, and there was a lot of people who spoke Spanish. And I speak a little bit of Spanish, but there was a big contrast of like connection. And I realized I love the connection piece of travel. And when you have that language barrier, sure, you can still connect, but the depth of conversations is a lot harder. So I would imagine that like community and like the deeper the connection that you want to make in terms of conversation and stuff too, I think can get really hard in places that don't speak English. And especially in like transformative periods where you like want to talk things through, I would imagine it's isolating in a spot that like most people don't speak English. It's like, how do you communicate what you're going through, you know?
Yeah, just me and my therapist in Tokyo.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah.
no joke.
Yeah.
No, that's true though. However, so something back to like the image of like the traveler, and this is
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, you're well, first, can you just explain like what your job is, and do you do influencing as well? Like, what is that
Yeah.
kind of world like?
Yeah. So for the past like 6 years, I've been in the tech space. So in college, I actually worked at Bumble. So I worked at
There
Bumble
you go. So that was
That's
doing
how
actually a
you know.
plug.
That's how
Yeah.
you know about Bumble BFF.
not
I see.
All
sponsored.
makes sense. All makes
Insider
sense.
That's
knowledge.
how I worked at Bumble doing like brand partnerships, and did that in college. And then I like went into the Shopify world. So I've been in like the e-commerce space for the past 5 years. And that was also fully remote. So I did that, worked full time, all 3 years of traveling. And then the last like 2 months of traveling, I decided to like take a step back and take like a sabbatical, some months off to like just travel. I was like, I have this podcast. Our whole perspective is on like remote work, which is super powerful. But I was meeting a lot of people who were like, I'm backpacking, I'm doing world packers, I've traveled for free, just traveling, doing different accommodation spots for like a year. And I was like, wow, it'd be really special to have like an experience not as like a full-time employee while working too. So that was amazing. And I felt like I grew so much at my company at the time, and I was craving just space to like expand. And I had come back from like this spirituality retreat and just like was really craving like more and purpose and just space and time to kind of think about that. So, um, yeah, in April was when I left like the corporate world. And since then I've done like we've been intentional about like just trying to take time off and unlearning a lot of like practices that I feel like were just instilled in me from being in the US. And I was fortunate, like I've had lower costs of living, like living in South Africa and other parts, that I was able to save and have like the comfort and ability to just have some months off. And it was a big decision because I was like, you feel this pressure to always be working, and especially like coming from like the east side of the US. And then though, like to give yourself that space, like for me, I've learned so much about myself and what fulfills me and I find purpose in. And was able to volunteer and stuff too. So for right now, I've done, yeah, like doing some partnerships and marketing, like content work with certain brands and like the wellness space. Have done that, did that a little bit in Cape Town, also for some companies remotely, and also like being back in person now in Mass. But now looking, yeah, we're doing the podcast and looking to get more into like company within the mental health space, and like tech mental health is what I'm super interested in going to. So yeah, that's the next journey. But I've always been fully remote. Like I think I worked in person for 3 months ever, and I was like, the commute to the office was just like not for me. So I'm very in tune with like remote work, and I'm like super passionate about helping people find remote work. A lot of our episodes have like companies hiring, and I post a lot on LinkedIn about like ways to build your personal brand to kind of attract remote work companies and also find remote work.
I need to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
Epic, I was about to say.
And for everyone listening,
Greg,
your
come on
podcast is Feel Your Soul, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
SOL. And
Love
also
that.
too,
SOL. Oh, nice.
on LinkedIn, like I'm very open to connecting with people. Like that's also been a goal of mine with some like more flexibility of hours and not working like set hours is connection. And I've been able to meet with a ton of people from LinkedIn that are super like-minded. And I feel like that's really powerful, especially in like a pivotal transformative phase of like really nailing down like what you want to do next. That's like fulfilling too, because for me that was like the one thing. I know we talked about this, Gregory's like I'm like at that point where like the fulfillment is what like matters the most, and like purpose and helping people and stuff too. So
and I just want to interrupt you rudely and piggyback on that of everyone who's listened to this podcast knows that I don't love social media, but I am healing my relationship with social media, and LinkedIn, like you said, is such a good place to meet people. Like that's how we met. We jumped on a call. I've been trying to do more of those 30-ish minute connection calls. And I've met so many really cool people on LinkedIn where we're not trying to get anything from each other. We're just trying to connect and grow and collaborate. And I've had people on the podcast like yourself, but it is just a really cool way to see what's out there. And then actually, from a results perspective, those are the people that end up putting your name in the ring, in the hat for a job interview or things like that. So it is good to just build that network and
100%.
get to know people. I wanted to ask you a question because I feel like a lot of today's episode is about getting out of your comfort zone. When you're in a foreign country, Vinny and I, he tells me all the time, like just the little things you're trying to do that are so hard because everything's in Japanese. No one speaks English. Like the smallest possible
opening my
thing.
mail is like crack the Da Vinci Code.
I get it.
It's so hard, Vinny. I always think of, and not to reminisce on studying abroad because that's what I'm about to do, but Vinny and I, our first day in Italy, we were hungover trying to buy fruit at an Italian grocery market. And we didn't realize that there's this whole system where you aren't allowed to touch the fruit.
Yep.
You have to point at it, and then they put it in a bag, and then you have to put a sticker on the bag.
You need to sticker it. You need to weigh it.
There's so many steps, and we are just getting berated in Italian, just sweaty.
Hungover.
We were just so sweaty because we were hungover. It was like 100 degrees. So
I thought this guy was trying to break into our apartment too. He's like trying to sell us leather jackets. Remember that guy?
Oh, Mad Max. So
Mad Max.
All this to say, getting abroad, getting out of your comfort zone, it's so important. And I would love to hear your reflections. Like, how much has Paige changed in the past 3 years? Like, if you imagine yourself, if you would have stayed at home for 3 years versus yourself now, what's different?
I feel like what's cool about travel, and also a similar experience, I don't know if you guys have done any retreats and stuff too, but like, it's not necessarily like you're changing, but it's more like you're on like covering the real like parts of you that like could have been hidden depending on where you were brought up, or like parts of the US. So I think that's like the first reflection I had, is like these are all things that like already exist within you. It's just like giving yourself the environment and space and people that maybe you feel more comfortable to like truly express yourself with, and then challenging yourself through discomfort of like, how do you show up in times that are challenging? And I think you gain more like traits that way of like resilience. And I learned a ton about like responding rather than reacting. So like reacting is something that like most people do, but responding is like, how do you like take a situation and then respond accordingly, like after processing and being more patient and like trusting the process of it too. It's like so many things that used to bother me or I'd get stressed about, I'm just like, oh, well, it was supposed to happen this way, and kind of just like surrendering to the process of it all. Also just has made me more of like a social person and more empathetic to like different stories and where people come from, and also not just the bubble of the US. It's like you can really see how people live their lives day to day, and it's very eye-opening to be like, not everyone just like gets on the commuter rail and works a 9 to 5. Like some people don't work office jobs at all. Most people don't work office jobs in other countries. So just being able to learn that firsthand and see that, and like I still have vivid images of just like moments through travel that like I'll always have. Um, and to your point, Vinny, like there's moments that are so hard, and then there'll be one connection moment that happens where you're like, this is 1,000% why everything is worth it, because you have these like special moments in time with people or places that like you know that they will remember it forever, and so will you, and that's like a really special feeling. Um, and just to be able to have that experience where you're like, it's like a pinch me moment, like you can't believe it's real. It makes you more grateful. Like I think it's hard because it shifts your kind of reality of what your day to day can be, especially coming back to the US. You're like, okay, it was a Wednesday and I was on a helicopter ride. Like there's that. And then you're like back to your routine. But I think I've appreciated like yin and yang, like the highs of travel and of instability and like being spontaneous. And then like you miss the stability and the familiarity of being home, and like the balance of the two, I think is something that I learned, that I never thought I'd crave like routine as much as I did when I was craving home, or like you miss like things that you were so sick of and just wanted to like escape from. So I don't think I would have learned that unless I like left.
I got goosebumps when you said
Yeah.
it's less about how I changed and more about what have I uncovered? What have I discovered about my true self, my true essence? So I love that perspective.
Yeah.
And Vinny, there's hope for you. If you stay abroad for another 20, 25 years, you might get more interesting.
40 years. 40 years later, still trying to crack this nut. Yeah. Yeah, what you're saying, I mean, I wrote about that, like question, do we become somebody new, or do we just continually pull back the layers of who we truly are? And this kind of goes back to like why do it if you don't have to, and it's comfortable, it's like my life is happening here. If you don't know that there's more to you that could be uncovered, if you don't know there's more inside of you, that you need to have these experiences where you're exposed to new things and novelty, like what is it that makes you do it?
Traveling.
I think I'm just getting existential here. Like any new experience, really. Like, why put yourself in that place? Why put your hat in the ring? Why get in the arena?
Yeah, I think it's on the what's on the other side of it, and it's like the unknown of it that's exciting.
And how can you tell? Like, Greg, you could come in here too. Like, how do you tell what's on the other side of that thing if you don't know? Like, how do you change your life if you don't know what there is that's like so much better on that other side of fear, or like whatever it is?
I'll jump on in.
Yeah.
I want to hear your perspective too, Paige, but what's coming up for me is it really is accepting the call. Whenever there's a call to the unknown, that's the hardest part. It's putting yourself into not knowing, especially if you've been there before. Like all three of us at different points, I mean, probably every human being listening to this, at different points throughout your life, there's been some sort of change, some transition where you don't know what's going to happen next. And it's so uncomfortable to put yourself back in the unknown and the unfamiliar. But I think why we do it is we either have a lived, felt experience or just an intuitive knowing that that is really where everything is created from. You have to be in that messy middle. You have to not truly know what's going to happen next for the really great things to happen. I think if you know what's going to happen next, maybe it's a small jump, but at least in my own experience, the moments where I've known least about what's going to happen next, what my life will look like, that's when my life has changed the most. And it's been the most extraordinary.
Hmm. I agree. And I think it's a really, it's like an exciting, but it's a really scary phase to be in, because as humans, we really want to always have an answer, and we want to be in a spot that's comfortable. But I think what helps me is like reflecting back on every amazing, memorable moment that comes to mind first. And it's always been on like the other side of discomfort too. So like reflecting back on your own life, of all these moments you can remember, like most probably didn't happen because you knew that you were in your comfort zone. Like most happen outside of it. So I think that's what really helps me, is like constantly reflecting back on like, okay, if I like was too scared to study abroad, then literally none of this could have ever happened, because then I wouldn't have, one, known I liked studying abroad, and then all of these things too are like, if I didn't step outside of my comfort zone and like apply to this job, then I wouldn't have had the opportunity or the experience to then land that remote job too. So it's like everything, the smaller steps too that you have gone through, like reflecting on those to like be your own self motivation moving forward too, of like the hard things are on the other side of comfort most often, and they're scary, and but using yourself as kind of that example, I think helps.
And one more thing I'll share to that is that in the beginning, I mean, there's so many parallels between you starting the podcast with your friend and when Vinny and I started the podcast. We wanted it to be an honest and unfiltered look into what it's like to actually quit your job and follow your dreams. And in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, we were so dramatic. We talked about hurling ourselves into the abyss of the unknown and not knowing. And I look back on my old content and it's just so dramatic. And I think as I've worked with more people, as I've experienced it for myself more times, you can tiptoe up to the edge and peer over into the unknown. You can maybe get in a little more gently than diving in head first. It's
Mm.
beautiful if you dive in head first and great things will happen, but I don't think it needs to be so dramatic and chaotic as we have made it seem, Vinny, at some points. Mostly me.
We have dramatized it a bit. Yeah. Seriously, it's like it's a playfulness, really. Like
Mm.
realizing that creation, like you're saying, Greg, is on the other side of the fear, and that the fear, we all fear it. And like to have courage is not an absence of fear. It's just going for the thing anyway, because you realize that what can come from it is just what makes life worth living. And it's not all, well, it's very seldom easy, but it is, you feel it in your body, like this, I'm going to talk to this person, or I'm going to do this thing, send the letter, take the trip, take the shot. Like you feel it in your body that there is something here that wants to happen. And Greg, like you were saying, you answer the call. Like that is the call that you feel intrinsically, like inside of you. You feel just, that's why I'm here. Like I had to follow this feeling. And yeah, there are difficult moments, lots of highs, lots of lows, but it's almost like if you just, sometimes when you don't answer the call, and you're like, God damn it, should have done the thing, should have taken the chance. It happens all the time. But then the times you do, it's like, that makes it all worth it. And yeah, it could be different for everybody. Like, well, of course it is. And like traveling might not be for everybody, but just those, whatever that call is for you, like it is,
Mm-hmm.
it's magic. That's like where the magic is made in this life, and just answering it and the enthusiasm. Um, Shifting tiny bit. Like with me, something that I think about a lot, and actually a hurdle that I have, um, more or less overcome recently, is being like, it's kind of almost feeling guilty for this life, or feeling like um, I'm doing something not wrong, but that I need to start like settling down, or I need to, not even 29, but I need to like start figuring out where I want to be, and I need to like start focusing on just kind of having shit figured out more.
Mm,
And then realize lately, like, this is, I've answered the call. Like, this is something I've known since graduating college, that this is what I want to do. That's why we started the podcast. But still, over the last 7 years, I've like, well, taken a leap by being here, but I haven't fully accepted and embraced like wholeheartedly that I just don't care what anybody else is doing. Like, this is what I want to do,
mhm,
and I'm just going to do it to the fullest. There's
mhm,
always been a little bit of like guilt or feeling like I'm doing something a little bit wrong, or that I'm falling behind in one way, even though I might be, you know, I don't know, doing other things in a different way.
mhm.
um, how have you managed like that? I guess like feeling like do you feel like, oh, maybe I should be trying to figure out where I want to, you know, set my roots down, or um, I should have like more concrete, putting words in your mouth, but like I should have more of a concrete thing, because
Mm,
if you're nomad, it's like the world is your home.
yes.
But then it's like some people you see and it's like, maybe they're doing it right if they, they already have, I don't know if you have a boyfriend or anything, but like they're getting married and 30, and
Mhm,
it's like they're starting to create a family and
mhm.
all that stuff. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
throw that paint on the wall, see what
Yes.
sticks.
I think it's like one of the biggest things I've talked about with my friends who nomad is like it's like you want to tell yourself that like timeline doesn't matter and you're on your own journey, and that's like part of my thought process, but then there's the other side that's just human nature of like comparison. And I think that's when like age timelines, we actually have a podcast episode we talked about age timelines and societal pressures, and I honestly listen to it anytime I'm feeling like it because it's like my own voice, that it's actually helpful. Because when I recorded it in the moment, I was like peak middle of traveling, like not, and I was just like, it was great advice. It was like, you're on your own journey, like you know what you want and it's best for yourself too. And also it's like you can't look at anyone else's dreams and realities, because even if it's someone super close to you, like that's not necessarily what would make you happy. So I think it was just that realization too. And then also it's like whose timeline are you looking at too? So many times it's like on social media and we're comparing ourselves to people who are like, oh, this random person from my high school just got married and now they have a kid and they just bought a house. But it's like, one, you have no idea if they're actually happy. And two, like that's their dream. That's not your dream. So I think the more in tune you can be with yourself and what you want, and then also just like, I think for me what's helped is just creating like reflection and space to reflect and be aware of what I want, because that can shift. So for me, for those 3 years, I felt super satisfied by being fully nomadic. And then at a certain age and at a certain point, I'm like, I am craving a bit more of community, which is why I like spent more time in Cape Town. And then when I really loved like building community, having longer friendships there, I was like, okay, this is like a sign that I don't want to like shift locations every single month. Like now I'm craving community and connection in that way. Um, and then I was like, I've also started to miss like timelines of like milestones at home. So now it's more like, how can you shift that lifestyle? But I think until you have this like intuitive calling that's kind of like, this feels like I've done it for enough time, or maybe not that you feel a pressure to settle down, but you want to, like you feel like you're craving a home or you're craving your own things. Like for me, I would be like, I was in Italy and I remember being like, I really want to like buy this item, but like I'm like, what am I gonna, I'm just gonna travel with it, like I don't have a place to put it in. And I think just like being in tune with these little signs of like what you want, and if it's, I mean, you're always going to sacrifice something, but if it's worth more than the other lifestyle, and when you can kind of like give and take the two.
Mhm.
But also noticing who you're comparing yourself to in terms of that timeline, and settling down like where those narratives come from. Because once I started digging into that, like, okay, why do I want this? Like, who am I comparing myself to? And like, would that actually make me happy? And it's like unlearning things that are like typical of what you might not actually want to.
Great. Yeah. So many good points. Like, I mean, that relates to what you're saying before of like, unlearning just that the typical day or typical work week or like that is just in place because it's this thing that's been constructed out of like our common misery like our it's created for factory jobs like the 9 to 5. That's not the way it has to be. Like we can create our own perfect day and we can live that day every day. That doesn't mean we're going to like Legoland or it's like the perfect day. What does that mean to you? It's for me like I have it pretty often. It's pretty much like exercise, writing, connecting, and like how to make that your life. So yeah, realizing that, and then also just took 3 months off Instagram, and I came back this week kind of begrudgingly. I think big clip. I think objectively, life is better off Instagram. Like I can't see how it's not, but maybe that's a hot take. It just is, but it's part of life also,
To an
and
extent, yeah.
like it's part of our. I guess it definitely doesn't have to be for everybody, but um, I'm like, okay, if I'm gonna be back on here, at least just understand what it is. I'm like, I went on and I started comparing myself to somebody like on there. I'm like, oh my god, right? I took 3 months and I wasn't doing this for 3 months, and now I'm back, and like the first thing I do is comparing myself, and it made me just notice it. I was like, wow, well that's a benefit of like just taking time off is realizing the little traps we put ourselves in, and just like there was a whole thousands of years before social media where we weren't exposing ourselves to this. Like this doesn't have to be the way life is, and even if it is part of culture and everything, just like realizing that we don't have to um like people weren't comparing themselves to the entire world until the last 15 years or whatever. Like so just I don't know what I'm really trying to say here, but just it helped me a lot just see that like we compare ourselves, and that person who I was comparing myself to is probably obviously going through their own stuff, and like
Right.
it's just this ecosystem of you think that person has it better, but they're thinking the same thing about you, and
Yeah.
it's like just this
And it's a
interesting
highlight.
game.
It's a highlight reel too, so you don't really see anyone's downside too. So you're comparing like the worst way you've ever felt to like the best way they've
Yeah.
ever felt. So it's not an equal comparison at all. And two, you also are assuming that every photo is representative of how they feel. Like you see someone get married, and I've learned now too that like, okay, but are they actually happy? Are they doing it out of like force or pressure? Are they settling? Like you also have no idea the reasoning behind every photo that you see. Or they buy a house, but you also, that might not be your reality. Or I'm like, okay, well, that's their dream. So I think it's just like anytime I begin to compare, it's like what's more productive is like more inner work on yourself of like how do you find your inner voice more, and like what modalities do you feel like you're most in tune with yourself. Because I think comparing only makes me more confused too. Like if I put myself in an environment where I'm comparing, it's like it does the opposite of like finding yourself when you're not like in line with what you want to be doing too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like you've done awesome stuff on just like listening to yourself, and like you're saying about just reflecting. How was that something that is that something that comes natural to you, or like how did you get into that
Yeah.
you know sort of
Um,
stuff?
I would say I've always practiced yoga for the past like 10 years. Yoga's been like a fundamental part of my life and something through travel that I could always do and have a part of like my practice. So that was the first piece, like spirituality wise, that I got into. And then from there, meditation. So like meditation, practice. And then most recently, or also reading, like I've read a lot of like self-help books, love podcasts, audiobooks. I like don't really read for people say this like you should read for like something like for pleasure, and I'm like I'm always reading something that's like with some greater purpose about like your purpose or finding different like elements or gratitude or like the psychology of different things. So I think that's a part of it too. And I also studied psychology in undergrad, so I feel like I have a bit of that as my background. And yeah, also most recently, which I don't know if either of you have experienced breath work, but breath work has been like the most fundamental, like biggest impact of my life. And I had done it a few years back, but I most recently got into it this year. And I think that has led to a lot of clarity, like faster than I would have gotten to without it. So have you guys experienced breath work at all? Or
I have
yeah.
on a retreat, as we were
Yeah.
talking about retreats earlier, and I'm curious about your breath work. Is it continuous breath work for like a certain amount of time? Is it more Wim Hof style?
Yeah. So I've done it at retreats as well. And then I actually work now with like a coach who does breathwork like sessions. So I've learned from her as well. And then I use a couple different apps. Like I use the app Open and this app Retreat. So a bunch of different styles and different varieties of like sessions. And I've done some in-person ones. Like when I got back to Boston, I was like, okay, I experienced all of this abroad. I did it a ton in Cape Town, like once a week, every Friday night, I would do like a breathwork session, and met a lot of people through that, like a lot of like-minded people who like are doing breathwork on a Friday night. Like it's a very unique crowd.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, in person is always my favorite. I think it's helpful though to develop like your own practice and use it like to your advantage that way. But for me, retreats have been super powerful. Or in person, like one-off events. I went to one in Boston, and I'm going to a retreat at the end of this month too, and then one next month in Mexico. So I've prioritized now like retreats as like intentional travel. Like if I'm going to travel, it will be for like stuff like that. And then you do two things, like build community through who you're meeting, and then also through like the event itself and like bettering yourself too. So that's also the space I'm super passionate about, is like the tech, like wellness space, like breathwork, meditation, like companies like Headspace, Calm, and the impact that it can have on companies too, like corporate wellness, but also like on an individual level too.
I've had huge results from the continuous breath work where it's in person. It's like someone leading it. It was on that retreat, and it was, I think, like 30 or 40 minutes of continuous, like in through the belly, chest, and then out, like all through the mouth. And it was one of the
Yes.
most cathartic experiences of my life. I hadn't cried in years, and I was just sobbing like a baby, just releasing all this stuff that I had shoved down so deep, especially as a man, just all the emotions and the feelings and the sensitivities. So I'm a huge proponent. I've had way more benefit or payoff from things like that versus I've done the apps and the Wim Hof where you're doing like 3 rounds of 30 breaths and then holding, and that hasn't quite done it for me as much. But breath work is powerful.
It is. They say too, like you're healing yourself, but you're also healing, like, I don't know how deep you guys go in terms of like spirituality, but like past versions of yourself as well. So if you believe you're like an old soul, a lot of breath work, if there's stuff coming up too of like you're going through this really hard patch, you don't know why, where it's coming from, like a lot of breath work can help bring up past experiences and help like you work through those. And then too, like inner child healing, a lot of traumas that are like unresolved from your parents or your grandparents that they've never addressed are like stored within your physical body too. So breath work helps sort through all of those. So it's like deep work. And even if you're like, oh, like I feel like I don't have that much stuff, you get in and you're like, there's a lot to work through from like generations. And it's really powerful because it's like your mind shuts off and your body is just like processing. And people don't realize, like, people say stuff like I'm sick to my stomach or like my heart aches, but like that's actual physical emotion that's like stored in your body. So
Oh
breath
man,
work's
now you're speaking my
powerful.
language.
Yeah.
I'm going through a huge mind body uh, just transformation right now. I've had like 6 years of chronic back pain that
Wow.
I kind of this is why the last 3 months has kind of been this monk mode
Mm-hmm.
thing. It's been, I realized that it is a mind body thing, and
Mm-hmm.
that it's like stored trauma, stored emotion, repressed emotion that I've not dealt with. So just been in this mode of like, yeah, just understanding it. And that's why I'm doing therapy and unpacking all this
Mm-hmm.
stuff. I do a pretty awesome, I don't know if you know Joe Dispenza. I'm sure you do.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's great. I do his meditation, and
Mm-hmm.
great one is blessing the energy centers. You asked about
Mm-hmm.
spiritual. We're talking chakras, and and it's like this this breath where, yeah, you drive, or like you pull the energy from your three bottom energy centers,
Yep.
just like you're pulling water from a straw. He says, like up your spine, and then you hold it at the top of your head, and like doing that every day. Totally. I mean, I cry nearly every day
Mm-hmm.
doing it. Like,
So
it's so
powerful.
powerful. There it is. Yep. It's there's so much like stored in our bodies, and it's truly is hard to understand, because it's like, oh, I have this physical thing. This must be physical. Don't think so. There's
Mm-hmm.
the brain is and just the body is miraculous, and yeah, we heal ourselves.
Have you had experience with Reiki?
No.
No. I also would
Mm.
recommend Reiki, especially if like the meditations with the chakras are helping you. That's something
Mm-hmm.
that's like super powerful for me too. And I feel like I've had massage, like it's better relief than a lot of different things. And it provides a lot of clarity too, a
Interesting.
Reiki session. And you can also learn, like become Reiki certified on yourself as well too.
Mm. Maybe that's the
Yeah.
next stepping stone. You're a
I
Maybe
Reiki
had
that's your
master.
calling. Maybe that's what your body's trying to tell you.
Could be. I'm not be surprised.
that he's going to become a Reiki
Anything's
master.
possible.
Yeah.
Japanese Zen monk Reiki master.
Yeah.
I had one
Also,
question. Oh, go ahead.
question two: have you or looked into Vipassana, or have you heard of
Vipassana.
Vipassana?
Breathing, right? Is that
Vipassana. So it's like a 10-day. We're actually releasing. One of my friends went, and I did a podcast episode with her, like interviewing her about her Vipassana experience. But it's a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and she's similar to you. Had a ton of like chronic pain. She like had to leave her corporate job, a bunch of stuff, like was very unwell physically, and went to Vipassana and left like no pain at all. And it was just like
interesting?
processing emotions, sitting in silence for 10 days, very monk mode. So it could
Wow.
be your calling. But yeah, what she shared was just super interesting about her findings. And a book I'm reading, it's Lighter by Young Pueblo. He talks about like his Vipassana experience as well, and the benefits that it can have. It sounds to me like, oh, 10 days silent, but she said it was like the hardest thing she's ever
Uh,
done.
I was thinking about doing one in
Yeah.
Japan. Yeah, I mean, it sounds wild. Just
Mm-hmm.
10 days of just being in your own head, and when you think a lot, yeah, you process a lot of stuff. Like, Naval Ravikant has a great meditation where just sitting for an hour, like, and not like trying to silent your brain or anything, but just sitting there and thinking for an hour every day, and like
Mm-hmm.
you process things, because we don't give ourselves that dedicated time to just sit in silence. But I'm going to Burning Man instead.
Similar but different.
Yeah, exactly.
Hard left turn.
When is that?
Next week.
Oh,
It's a
wow.
Yep.
That's
Yeah, I'm coming home in a
you're
couple
welcoming
days.
back to the US.
Exactly. Yeah, I've never been. Going with a couple best friends.
That's awesome.
It's,
I think that will
have you
have a
been before?
similar impact. No, I have friends who've gone, but they have in South Africa, they have this thing called Africa Burn, which people
Really?
say is even better than Burning Man. And I haven't gone, but I was really close to going this past April. But
Wow.
I was like, it feels very intense for me right in that phase that I was in. So I was more doing
Yeah.
just like my own meditation and that vibe. But I've heard
Mm.
amazing things about both Burning Man and Africa Burn.
Should be quite the experience. Yeah, I think I need it. Just kind of a
Mhm.
just a release, like
Mhm.
spiritual, just have fun.
Mhm.
Best friends.
Amazing.
Yes.
So
Very
I've got
excited.
one more question I've been sitting on. I got to get it in here. It is in the social media realm.
Yeah.
How do you balance having these super memorable moments where you're having this once in a lifetime experience with your South African friend,
Mm.
the security guard front desk guy, or you're just in a new place, seeing a new landscape for the first time? How do you balance being there and fully enjoying the moment and creating content? Like,
Mm.
because you are an influencer and you do want to do things with that. How do you
Yeah.
balance that?
Good question.
Yeah. I think for me, the first part is always to like experience what I'm experiencing first. That's always like my top priority. And a lot of the influencing that I do, it's like just with brands that I feel very aligned to or that I would naturally be taking content with anyway. So it's like I've never actually partnered with anything that would be like I need to like go above and beyond to do something other than what would come kind of naturally. And also too, a lot of the partnerships aren't very strict. It's more like your own creative freedom, and I find those are better. So I have some flexibility of kind of like how I create the content, and two, I just use my iPhone too. So I think like even the helicopter video, like that wasn't the priority. I think I took like a few clips here and there, but I think what I'm really good at is like the storytelling and piecing videos together. That it's not like I recorded the whole thing and I had this whole camera set up. It's just like little clips and then you piece them together like later after the experience. So I never do anything like in the moment, also for safety like reasons. I normally post like a couple days after whatever current activity I'm doing. So normally it's just like quick clips or photos with like iPhone content. And for me, I like really enjoy photography, and I would be taking all of that for my own self, anyways, memory wise, just to have. So in terms of sharing it, it's something I'll do like later on. But
Mm.
I think there's also like moments that I use it more than others too. And I think what's cool, I mean, I didn't get this, but a lot of my friends got film cameras, which I think was a cool shift to see like, oh, they're not always on their phones and they have this camera that's like captures moments kind of more organically, and it's not so much pressure on like what this looks like. And it's actually one of my friends got it for that reason. She was like, I feel like I put so much pressure on like taking the right photo and the right angle, and then you see all the options and you retake it. And like something with film cameras, like you take it once and it's just like you don't see it until you get developed. So I think that's like a cool trend that's happening now. It's like less pressure on like perfectionism of you take one photo and it takes you like 20 minutes to just like take the same thing. So
Mm-hmm.
trying to not like be too consumed with like this perfect video or this perfect photo, and especially for like storytelling video content, I think the more raw, like organic human element and human error flaw, I think also does better. So I try to not mind too much if it's like a storytelling piece like that for like a TikTok or something.
I really like that perspective. What's coming up for me is live first, tell the story later. And Vinny and I talk a lot about writing. We love writing about experiences because you have to live the experience first and you're fully present for it. And then you get to write about it a couple of days later when you're at a cafe, when you have some downtime. So it's not like the storytelling is getting in the way of the experience, but it sounds like you can balance that by really focusing on just having the experience. And then what you said about, I would be taking these pictures, videos, anyways, just for
Mm-hmm.
yourself. That I think feels like a good check in with yourself. Like, would I be doing this if I was just doing this for fun?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then choosing what you want to share too. So I think taking breaks from social media is like something I definitely could be doing more as well, because it is so easy to get like consumed and sucked into it. And it's more just like monitoring how many hours you're spending. And I think like that's important too, because I always say if I'm like consuming more, like if anytime I find myself scrolling and just scrolling, it's like I try to create just as much as I'm consuming or more, like always to be creating more than I'm consuming, to be like getting the positives out of social media. And just unfollowing anything that doesn't make you feel good. Like I'm constantly like following accounts that I really like and unfollowing anything that I'm like, oh, I just saw this and like I didn't feel good, like I'm gonna unfollow it, because what is the point? It's your own like platform that you log on to. So for your experience, Vinny, when you logged on and like didn't feel good after that, like I would just, I don't know, maybe unfollow that person or like, you know.
That's 100%.
Yeah.
That's another thing I learned. I'm like,
Yeah.
part of me was the trepidation of going back. I'm like, I don't want to see the same people who I was looking at. I don't even know them. Like, why does this person make up
Yeah.
this portion of my day when I don't even know who you are?
Oh,
I'm
thank
just
God it
looking
wasn't
at
me.
you, and it's making me feel worse. And it's this guy with a
You got the
mustache. I think his
unfollow.
name was Leg or something. And yeah, I unfollowed him first. So that was a big one. And yeah, it's just what you're saying. Just like, I think we're going to, like, I think the world, things happen cyclic, cyclically, cyclically, cyclically. What's the word?
You had it.
Cyclic.
Yeah, you got it.
Just sounds weird.
It
Sounds
makes
weird to me
sense to
saying
me.
it. Yeah, right. Circle. I think we are going back to human elements. Like, people are getting tired of like feeling this way. Of being like, why am I doing this? Doesn't make me feel that great. Like, it might take a little more time, and there will be obviously other technological advances that, like AI and stuff, but like, people want the human element. And if social media, if technology is obviously part of our lives, how to make sure you are making it in like a way that makes you feel good, and like you're using it in a way that helps you and that you're excited about. Because I do love like Instagram at times as well. Like, I love photography. I love creating little stories. I was down at it pretty hard, but I do enjoy it for sure. And
Little stories are fun.
they're
Sitting
fun.
down, creating, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I want to make a little story of the day. Like, I want this little adventure, and just making sure that like it's in a sense real to you. Like, is it adding to your life, if possible? Um, are you like are separating your life from this thing that is like a game, and kind of seeing it that way, instead of being like, this is life, this thing is so important. Um, because I do think, like I was saying, cyclical. There it is. That we're going back to that human element, in like, in all regards.
Yeah.
So,
Even to what we were talking about with like breath work, like I remember that was my realization, my first breath work session, when like I was crying. I had like this whole like experience, and I was like most like upset by like, this is so sad that like we as humans like need to be retaught how to breathe in order to like process emotion. But it's true, it's like you're born, that's the first thing you do, you're born and you breathe, and then like you forget how to breathe because we add so much like complex like shit into our lives that like doesn't matter, that like you forget the fundamentals, and you need like this session to like feel again or like process things. So I think like breath work, meditation, retreats, and like community and connection, like to your point, it's like it's all coming back around of like, we want less, and like shutting off technology, like even diets, of like getting back to the basics of like, what did we used to eat, and like that's how we feel the best. And like we just complicated so much stuff in every regard.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's simplifying has always been the recipe for success, no matter what it is. Like, it always makes me feel better. And just like, you'll add stuff on, and then just keep knocking it back down, simplifying until it feels good again.
Well, this feels like a good point to start wrapping up. Paige, I know we told you an hour, and it's been an hour and a half, so want to be cognizant of your time. I got my questions in. I'm feeling good. Vinny, you got anything else?
What's next? Where are you? Any places you wanna? What's your list look like?
Yeah.
Where you wanna go?
So for now, I Cape Town's always really high up on my lista. Like I was contemplating going back to Cape Town for 6 months. I was either going to do 6 months in Cape Town or 6 months in the US, just in terms of like having some sort of foundation and community. Um, but I think more now in the US, probably in Massachusetts by the beach, like in the North Shore of Massachusetts, and have that as a base, and then maybe do Cape Town in like February and March. But helping my sister plan for her wedding, and my grandparents are getting older and stuff as well. So special time with like my grandparents and my parents and my brother. So excited for that. And also, yeah, have a retreat at the end of this month in New York, and then have one in Mexico next month. So those are my travels through like the end of this year, and then we'll go from there. But I'm challenging myself now to kind of be in one place and have travel be like a part of my lifestyle just for like the foreseeable future, and just kind of like ground here at home. So yeah, that's my plans coming up. And you?
Awesome.
And where can people go to learn more about you? We talked a lot about the amazing things you're up to. The content you're creating is super inspiring. Where can people go?
Yeah, so all of my channels, my social channels, are just Paige Goldstein. So Paige Goldstein on TikTok, Instagram, and on LinkedIn. And then the podcast is Fill Your Soul, SOL. And that's on Spotify and Apple. And yeah, Shan and I are working on like a rebrand, and also we're just reorganizing in terms of the types of content we're creating and stuff, because Shan's going back to Cape Town and I'm staying here in the US for now. So probably be a similar vibe to how you guys have evolved your podcast too, which I think is super inspiring too. So we'll have to chat more with you guys about the structure and how you guys make it work.
I just got this picture here. It's just,
Let's go.
this is me in Lisbon, Greg
That's
in
awesome.
sunny San Diego.
Who
That's
is that
awesome.
man?
Sorry for the there's no mustache. What the-
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
It's a
awesome.
great-
I
the
love, sorry.
I was just going to say the
Great.
podcast, great tool for a long distance relationship with your best friends.
Yeah, that's
Precisely
awesome.
right. I wish I was doing one with my best friend, but maybe one day. I love what you were saying before about like you don't want it to be, this is like me traveling, and then this is like I'm always reminiscing, making it, just integrating it into your life. And I
Mhm.
think if people could take away something, that is what it's all about, and that's super
Mhm.
helpful for me. And something that, like when I said before, I'm turning a page and like realizing that I don't need to be like guilty for this life. I'm not missing out. That's basically what it is. It's
Mhm.
bringing this life into like into me.
Yeah.
Or like realizing that really home is inside of you, and you carry it with it wherever you go. And
Mhm.
you don't need to feel bad for being like, I'm just want to be back in America for a while,
Mhm.
maybe permanently, or like I do want to travel again. Like just kind of being aware of that and realizing that you carry these things, you carry these memories.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what it's all about.
It's beautiful.
Thank you, Paige.
Thank you
Awesome meeting
guys.
you.
That was so much fun.
Thank
That
you
was
so much for being
amazing.
here, for coming on the show. We'll put all of your social links in the show notes. And thank you,
Cool.
everyone, for tuning in with us today. As always, we love you guys. If you liked this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the Dare to Dream podcast on YouTube. You want to make sure you don't miss out on any of the amazing episodes we're going to be coming out with in the future. And if you liked this video specifically, please give it a like, leave a comment, let us know what you loved. Thank you so much for being here. We love you guys.